In Focus is powered in part by Go Chevrolet at I-25 and the Boulder Turnpike. Your source for new or used cars and trucks, and reliable service for most makes and models. Just visit GoAutoChevrolet.com.
Welcome to In Focus with Eden Lane.
Colorado has had a jam-packed fall theater season this year. Classic plays, brand new musicals, theater companies large and small. We try to sort it out and look ahead with Adam Goldstein from the Aurora Sentinel and John Moore from culturewest.org. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
We're spending our Saturday morning in the house at the Stage Theater of the Denver Center Theater Company's home base right here at the Helen Baum Feast. Thanks for getting up early on Saturday to come talk to me.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.
So this is the first time we're meeting you. So tell us about your paper and about your work at the Aurora Sentinel.
We cover a city of more than 340,000 with a relatively small editorial staff. So we all have our hands in a little bit of everything. But I've been there for about 4 years, and I've staked out the claim to the arts and entertainment beat. So in addition to covering the arts and culture in Aurora, which includes the Fox Theater and the Vintage, and the galleries down there, I've moved my bailiwick outside and tried to just kind of get a comprehensive view of what residents in Aurora might be interested in outside of the city as well.
It's really interesting that your paper has you cover virtually everything in the metro area instead of just what's in your suburban vicinity.
And that's kind of been a shift over the past 4 years too. When I first got there, the focus was really just more on Aurora, and we would use a lot of AP copy just on general entertainment stories. But along with some of the editors, I've made a push to have a kind of wider berth, because I think people who live in the suburbs don't stay in the suburbs, and we've tried to kind of cater to that with the newspaper.
And since the last time we've had a long discussion with you, John, your duties have changed. You're not the entertainment and theater reporter critic for the Denver Post. After being there for 12 years?
As the theater critic for 12 years, I was there for 18.
So that must have been a challenging time to sort of grapple with that decision.
Yeah, well, I think most of arts and culture journalism is transitioning to the web right now, and I'm just trying to be ahead of the train a little bit, and so I have a new outlet called culturewest.org.
I love that name, by the way.
Thank you. I didn't come up with it. A very smart man named Don Knox came up with that. But I'm still covering theater and music and that kind of thing.
Because you always covered the local sort of indie music scene.
Yes. One of my legacies at the Post was starting the Underground Music Showcase, which is now the largest music festival in Denver.
On your paper, the Sentinel, your publication schedule is how often?
When I first got there, we were a daily. So we had, and we still have, a lot of boxes near bus stops. It was kind of a commuter paper. And then we changed ownership a little more than a year ago, and we shifted to a weekly format. As far as my entertainment coverage goes, the dynamic is still pretty much the same. I'm probably out at a show or a concert 4 or 5 times a week.
There's also an online component with your paper?
There is, and like John said, the shift has really been toward getting stuff on the web first. So we've all had to add some more tools to our toolboxes in terms of learning platforms and being able to post things immediately. So even though we're not a daily anymore, the pressure to file has not gone away.
Since I've become a fan of Culture West, it seems as though there's not necessarily a regular schedule that you're publishing things. You're publishing things as they strike you. How do you decide that?
Absolutely, it's as they come. There might be a week when you have 5 or 6 posts, and then you might go a week with only 1 or 2.
Well, how is that to make that adjustment for you to go from that deadline of a daily paper and then all of the other things you were doing on the paper, the weekly posting, keeping the calendars updated? I can't even think of all the list of things you were doing at the Denver Post just as the theater and entertainment reporter. So now that you have that flexibility, how did you make that adjustment?
Well, it's been wonderful actually, because not having a print deadline has allowed you to take as much time as each individual story requires. You know, a certain story may take you 3 or 4 months to work on, and then there might be another story that you can turn out within an hour or two, and you're not filing a story and then waiting for the newspaper to hit the porch. You know, when you're ready to go, you just hit launch.
Do you just hit launch when you're done and you feel like you've finished editing it, or do you have a time of day that you calculate that you know it's going to get the most attention?
Well, I've been told that I should have better discipline in that way, because people will tell you there are certain times of the day when more people are paying attention, and it's all about getting in people's news feed at a time when they are seeing that most, which is, you know, surveys will tell you it's Wednesdays at 11 a.m. are the best time of the week to actually launch something online. But oftentimes I'm editing a video or something like my Bloody Andrew Jackson project, and I'd finish it at 2:30 in the morning, and I would just say, but I just want to have it online, so I'll launch it at 2:30 sometimes.
So we're finding arts organizations relying on social media to bypass or augment journalism to reach their audiences, their regular audiences, new audiences. Is that becoming a source for you as journalists, or is it just another thing to point people to as part of your story? How is that impacting your work?
I would say social media has been valuable kind of beyond words in terms of finding sources and getting leads, especially when you're connected with the community, because I think the performing arts community in general in Denver is pretty small, and everyone knows everyone, and so when you're connected on social media, you get a lot of feedback in ways that you wouldn't just from doing traditional interviews and looking for traditional leads. I've found plenty of stories on Facebook.
And I know that you're adept at getting your stories out on social media. Are you also finding it as a source for?
It is. If you're working on a story and you need to find sources quickly, you can just put something out there on Facebook and say, "Hey, does anybody know about what happened at the Madonna concert last night?" And suddenly 15 people will.
Perfect example.
Yeah, and 15 people will write in and say, "I was there," and then you're on the phone and talking to them, and you've got a story. I have found that performing arts organizations and journalists are somewhat in the same boat and are in a position to help each other. If you write a story about, say, the Denver Center or a show that they're doing here, and you post it on your website and you post it on your Facebook, it gets so many viewers. But if it's something that is positive that the Denver Center wants to get out there as well, then sometimes when they post it on their page, then it just opens up the possibility of your readership to grow that much more.
And helps them inform their own constituents.
Right. Sometimes it's good for the Denver Center to be able to have sort of independent journalism to tell people about a show, so it's in their best interests. And at the same time, they've got 10,000 followers on their Facebook page. So if the Denver Center puts one of your stories up there, then suddenly your hit counts go up. So you have to be really careful to maintain that line of independence between each other. But I think we're in a position to help each other.
Now that you're working on your own sort of outlet at Culture West, you're starting to do things beyond that you wouldn't have been able to do before, like the documentary that you did about Bloody Andrew Jackson.
Right. So
tell me about what that's like for you.
It was wonderful to be able to have the time to devote to a project like that I could spend 6 months on. And when Bloody was first announced, I heard from Ben Dickey that he was doing it, and I had already put in the print from having seen it off Broadway that it was one of my favorite shows of the new millennium. And now that I
think you and I were the only Coloradans beside Ben Dickey that saw it.
You probably saw it, that's true. And depending on when this airs, I think there's still 2 more days for people to go see it. So
right.
go see it at the Aurora Fox. But when that started, Ben Dickey is a theater major, but he's also a marketing expert as well, and an ultra runner. So when he decided to do things like get a treadmill and go run on the 16th Street Mall for 24 hours, you knew that was going to be a good story and good video. And every part of that process, from doing auditions not at a theater but at the High Dive Rock Club, everything about that project lent itself to longer form storytelling. And then of course your viewers already know the story about him falling into the trapdoor on opening night. And it just became an opportunity for long form video storytelling I think I ended up with like 50 hours of tape, and I distilled it to 5 10-minute parts. And I just know that if I were still the theater critic for the Denver Post with an obligation to give as much coverage as I can to more than 100 theater companies that we have around the state, I never would have had the time to go to those rehearsals and to be able to be there to get that video.
I love how you described it as being embedded with the company.
Right.
You could have never done that. As the Aurora Sentinel would not have the luxury of time to let you do that.
Right.
And there would always be that question of where are you the journalist and where are you friends with them?
Well, you're always a fly on the wall, but once you make a decision that you're going to embed yourself for the purpose of making a journalistic story, I think that video was video journalism, but there was no way after spending that much time with them that I was going to be the critic of record because I knew too much.
Because you're so connected to the work that they have done, you know so much of the backstory. It's hard to give the kind of criticism that you might otherwise.
In my case, I was at every other rehearsal too, and so a critic would not have been privy to those kind of observations and to see how it grew and that kind of thing. So you want to be the eyes of the viewer when you go in to review a show, and you have to come in with a completely blank slate, and you can't do that if you've been following them around for 6 months.
That show was one of the highlights for me that I was looking forward to for the opening of this season that was so crazy in terms of the volume. We talked about how small, you mentioned how small the creative community is in Colorado in terms of it's very tight-knit, but you also touched on how many, there's more than 100 companies here. So that almost seems like a contradiction, but there's just so much work going on. And this fall, the offerings were fast and furious and really cram-packed. So I guess where I want to shift now is, what was your take, or I guess we're still kind of in the middle of that, the beginning of this theater season here?
For this season, it just seemed like every weekend there were 3 or 4 shows that I had on the top of my list. But with the fact that I'm kind of Aurora-centric in mind, Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson was the kind of top billing, but
it was also a big news story.
It was a big news story. And
because of what happened.
Exactly. A lot of drama. The anecdotes themselves lent for kind of the drama of itself apart from the show. So, but there's just been so much going on in my backyard that I kind of had a difficult time getting out of Aurora this fall. Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson, but also even Picasso at the Aurora Fox, I think, was a big step for them. It was John Ashton production. And I think the Vintage kicking off really their formal season in Aurora. I think I kind of got the sense that they're at home. They finished their little studio theater in that Dayton Street facility, and they just built a little cabaret stage. So
so they have 3 performance spaces in that space.
Yeah, and everything from, cabaret singing to the Rocky Mountain Deaf Theater had their premiere over there as well with Some Girls. It just seems like there's so much going on just in my backyard with the Pay Center and the Lone Tree Arts Center as well.
And for you, we know that Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson was your main focus for Culture West for the beginning of the season. What else stuck out to you that you were really looking forward to, or you had high hopes for, or that you were surprised about?
Well, I think the interesting thing about the fall season is it can be expressed in numbers. I'm sort of a numbers geek, and I ran these this week. But I found that if you count how many theater companies in Colorado produced at least one show within the last 12 months, the number is 128. And that's a number I've been tracking for 12 years, and it's never been higher than 115 before. So we're at an all-time high of companies that are producing work. Now,
in this
in
compressed
Colorado
season, too.
Yeah. Now, these are not all companies that have entire seasons, and I think that that's part of the problem. That number's at an all-time high, but I also did the numbers according to how many theater companies have a show scheduled within the next 12 upcoming months, and the number drops to 67. And I think that we're starting to reach a saturation point, and we're also being kicked by the economy rather severely. Right now, I think this fall season, most companies there's been all this work, but they've all been reporting difficulties at the box office. It's been a rough fall.
Probably not just because of the volume of work available, but they can't get their messages out.
Right.
Like, even the Denver Center Theater Company could have a hard time getting ads on television during this election
Right.
season.
I think the election season has more to do with it than anything else. I mean, when we're a swing state and we're getting bombarded with these campaign ads where they're both trading on politics of fear, the viewers are being told that if you elect the other guy, then we're going to go over a cliff. And I think the effect of that message over months and months and months has been that families are holding on to to each other and to their wallets too, and saying, well, if we're about to go over the fiscal cliff, no matter who we elect, then we better save every penny that we have. And I think
So
that's
it's not just they can't get their message out; it's that even those that are aware of what's happening might be less likely to spend the money to go out.
Right. I think Christmas, which is coming up, the holiday theater season is pretty much recession-proof, and I think a lot of families have been waiting for the traditional holiday season before they come back to the theater.
We have some really great holiday offerings coming up. Are any of the holiday offerings something you're looking forward to in particular?
Well, it's funny, I'm working on a story about balancing commercial draw during the holiday season with creative integrity, and you do see the familiar titles come up. Christmas Carol, of course, White Christmas, and I think it's kind of a juggling act for producers and for actors as well to try to do something new for the holiday season and to bring audiences in as well. So that being said, I do look forward to some of those stories that I've seen over and over again, because I think there's a reason that they are durable and there's a reason that they continue to bring in audiences.
There has to be a reason that the Denver Center Theater Company is taking over the Buell with 2,800 seats to do White Christmas.
To do White Christmas, yeah. And even seeing something like A Christmas Carol in a different venue under a different director, I think it's going to be much different at the Aurora Fox than the production that you see here, for example. I'm looking forward to how they fit it into a smaller space. And
it could be scarier.
It could be scarier. The Fox producer, Charlie Packard, has said that his emphasis is going to be on the ghosts. So I'm really curious as to see how he puts his spin on the different spirits, because he's gone back to the Dickens text to kind of find cues for costumes and find cues for just aesthetics as well. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm also looking forward to some of the pieces in the smaller stages as well. At the Vintage, the Rocky Mountain Deaf Theater Company is doing a holiday show where I think it's anecdote based, and it's going to be in the small black box theater. Very intimate, immediate, and that space, the studio space, it's interesting because I think it's about the same count in terms of seats as the old Vintage was
on 17th.
On 17th. So it harkens back to that.
They've almost replicated that space in that little studio. They use the same seats and equipment.
Yeah. So it harkens back to those days where you're just right in the middle of it, which I always felt was one of the charms of the Vintage. So I'll be happy to see how they incorporate that with a Christmas show.
What are the holiday offerings that you might be looking forward to, or are there any?
Well, you know, the holiday season, as far as theater, interests me less than any other time of the year.
Because it's so many repeat performances.
Whatever brings people into the theater, I'm in favor of, and this is the time when theaters make their money, and a lot of times that pays for some of the riskier work that they do later on in the year. Plus, they're actually giving their audiences what they want, so that's great. A lot of people are going to come here to see White Christmas in the Buell Theater. It's interesting you mentioned Christmas Carol, because I think this is the first year where I think that Christmas Carol at the Aurora Fox is the only version of a Christmas Carol that's being done anywhere. But so when I get excited about holiday theater, it's when there's a little bit of a different twist. You know, by this point, Sandland Diaries is not exactly a new thing, but I'm looking forward to seeing Matt Zambrano play the role of Crumpet for the Boulder Ensemble Theater Company after 3 years of Jeff Kent doing that role. So that should be fun. Matt Zambrano is a graduate of the Denver Center's National Theater Conservatory, and he's a wonderful comedian, and it's going to be a lot of fun to see what he does. And there's a fun show that defies description at Lanny's Clock Tower Cabaret called Balls.
That's on my holiday list.
We'll just say it includes Mary Trevathan and Jerry Hinshaw and sock puppets. You know, what more do you need? And guest celebrities each night.
And it's a really fun space to visit anytime. And to think of going there for a holiday show is a delicious contradiction.
Yeah. And just for consumer use, I should say, Arvada Center is doing Miracle on 34th Street.
I've never seen it on stage as a musical. I mean, it's one of my favorite movies, so I know the story enough to sadly quote almost the entire thing. But I've never seen it as a musical. Have you either seen this?
I have never seen it, no.
So I'm glad they're doing something we haven't seen before.
Yeah.
That's interesting that all three of us have never seen it done. They interestingly have some of their lead roles being played by Colorado actors as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that a time of year where we see companies employing more local actors, do you think?
Well, I was a little bit nervous going last year to see It's a Wonderful Life, the radio play, just for the same reason that I knew the film so well, and I was afraid that I was not going to enjoy it as much. But the fact that they did have so many local actors and faces that I knew, and the format of it was really, in my mind, something that I wasn't expecting. So I think the fact that you do see more local actors and more local talent in some of these holiday shows, I think it makes it more of a draw for me, at least.
I think this is the time of year when there's just so much holiday theater that local actors are working in December, which is great.
That's an awesome thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So, of course, we want to make sure that the theater companies are able to continue to support
Right.
local talent as much as they can. Since we have sort of your take on the beginning of this crowded season and what's the holiday, if I were to ask you now, how would you describe the state of the art of theater in Colorado?
Well, just following up on my numbers, I would say we're in trouble. You know, I think that what those numbers tell you is that we have more artists who are taking out mortgages and risking their homes in order to produce the shows that they love, such as Abster Productions doing August Osage County, and Ben Dickey doing Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson. As Adam said, it was an interesting fall at the Aurora Fox, seeing John Ashton's show on one stage and Ben Dickey's show on the other. But I find that to be kind of troubling as well, that a company like the Aurora Fox that we depend on to be offering a full season of theater, at the traditional opening of the fall theater season, they're not producing anything of
They
their
were
own.
independent productions.
They're just, you know, turning into a rental house. And I think that's kind of troubling because more and more of the independent artists are having to take the risk to put on art right now because the economy is so bad. It makes perfect fiscal sense. It probably was a very smart move on the Aurora Fox's part to find people who were willing to come in and do those. But I think it's sort of endemic of the larger problem, because when you have 128 theater companies that have been producing work in the last year, but only 67 of them are currently scheduled to be producing work in the next year, that tells you that we've got a lot of people who are really going show to show. And depending on how they do at the box office, that's really going to dictate whether we're ever going to see them again. And a lot of these great risky shows that we saw this fall did not draw a lot of people to the box office, and I don't know that we're necessarily going to see some of those companies ever again.
What's your take on the state of the art of theater right now?
And going off what John just said, shared resources is a big trend that I'm noticing more and more. At the Aurora Fox, that was the beginning of the season, but also you have so many companies that are working in that space. You have Ignite that's with Sweeney Todd that's opening tonight, and that's one of those companies that has become a resident at the Fox but is separate and independent. And more, I think that's the method that for survival, especially when you're talking about a theater like the Fox that does depend on money from the city, and that's always uncertain. I mean, that can disappear. You know, from year to year, they sweat about whether they're going to have continued funding. So I think the pressure is to find other streams of revenue, just to show that you can be independent in creative ways. So I can see a troubling trend there, but I can also see the fact that creative solutions are going to come up. And I think if someone is committed enough, there's going to be other creative types and artists that provide some kind of venue and some kind of aid for them to see it realized.
I would be remiss too if I didn't say that the Aurora Fox has turned into the melting pot of theater in the local theater community.
Right.
It's become a haven for a lot of these small theater companies to exist. You know, the Rocky Mountain Deaf Theater started at the 73rd Avenue Playhouse. Well, that closed. You know, where do you go after that? And Charlie Packard's really done a great job in welcoming these companies in and giving them a professional environment to do their work. And if you're in the Aurora Fox area, which I believe should include the whole metro area because it's only 5 minutes from downtown.
Right.
But the idea that you can go see the Rocky Mountain Deaf Theater and you can see Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson, you can see John Ashton do his thing, and you can see the best of what the Aurora Fox does as well. And the Vintage Theater is 3 blocks away. It's probably the most exciting development in local theater this year.
They just need some restaurants nearby.
They do need a few more restaurants.
And that's the push right now.
And that's probably what will happen. That's the natural evolution. Arts propels commerce.
So it'll be a mini version of the Denver Center complex with
I'd
the
love to see that.
infrastructure.
Well, and it's funny, I've been covering that area for 4 years, and I grew up in Aurora, and I never really frequented that part of town before I started working for the Sentinel. And I had some stereotypes about East Colfax, and it's really just a matter of overcoming people's misconceptions about certain areas of town. It's 5 minutes away, but you would be amazed at how many people have never been east of Colorado Boulevard on Colfax just because of urban legends that they hear. But
it's so outdated.
It's so outdated, and it's a vibrant area. It's not just the theaters; they've got galleries there. They've got a few restaurants, and they do need a few more. But I think it's interesting, just like you saw with the Santa Fe district, how something like the arrival of the Vintage and the innovations at the Fox can create a whole different atmosphere and a whole different
actual
attitude.
enterprise zone of its own.
Right.
Well, I appreciate beginning this conversation. We've only talked about a little bit of the opening of the fall and
Right.
the holiday season, and we've talked about some really critical things for the creative work that's being done here in Colorado. So I'm hoping that after we get through the holiday season, we can pick this up and see where we're going then.
It's too bad too, because I have 3 pages of shows that are coming up that we didn't really get to talk about.
But they can find them on your webpage.
People should check out what's going on at the Denver Center Theater Company in February, though. That's the best time of the year when the New Play Summit is
Colorado
going
New Place, absolutely.
Colorado New Play Summit, and they're going to be debuting both Grace and the Art of Climbing and Ed Downloaded, which is the first real main stage multimedia show that they're going to be doing here. It's going to be a really exciting time down here at the Denver Performing
So we'll
Arts
have to
Company.
reconvene here at the Denver Center Theater Company.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
That's all for this edition. Remember to join us on Facebook and Twitter. With all that Colorado has to offer, we're here to help you keep it in focus. Thanks for watching. Good night.